Let's take a look at the differences between these four different categories. First is the prototype. What is a prototype? It's an early version of an idea, product, or solution to gather feedback. Right? We've spent a bit of time talking about different ways to prototype, but it's really a tool to help you get feedback. Methodology. This is different than a prototype in that it's a structured approach to solving the problem. Like the scientific method is an approach to diagnosing and solving a problem. Process. This is really the series of actions for the customer or the user to complete a set of tasks or for someone to have a complete experience. And so you'll go through a process, and a process might be included in your prototype as well. And then a theory of action is it explains why certain things happen with the usage of your product or solution and how customers might behave and the change management that might be involved in something like this. And so going back to my example with blended learning, we thought we had a great prototype. We were getting the outputs that we wanted. We had a methodology. We even had a process that the schools could follow. But the thing that we didn't have is a clear theory of action, which allowed for the adoption and kind of the mindset shifts that need to happen in order for somebody to change what they're doing, to implement a new program and put the effort into doing something different. Prototypes work best when you put all four of these categories together: the methodologies, the processes, and the theory of action. I'm going to give you an example of a company called DocuSign, where, as you might well know, they provide a platform so that you could electronically sign legal documents. Well, it wasn't adopted very quickly in the past, but they used a method called agile method to constantly iterate on the product to, as people got feedback around, in particular around their fears around whether it was a qualified signature on a document, they added more capabilities to verify that the person signing the electronic documents on the other end. The process that they had to deal with is that the legal entities had to accept an electronic signature. And so they had to work with the legal entities to get feedback from them as to what would qualify and what would allow them to accept an electronic document. And then that took a bit of time, but that's part of the process, the overall kind of experience that somebody would have with not only the product, but with the end product itself, the signed document. And then finally, the theory of change is that people would be, or organizations would be willing to pay money to get efficiency from an electronic signature versus having to create multiple copies on paper and then have it hand signed, and even shipping the contracts to wherever the signatories needed to be, and then making sure you collected copies and then sent them out. That process took days, weeks, months in some cases, depending on your organization. And so, for a small fee, they believed that there was broad acceptance, everybody would be doing it. And now we're at a place where a lot of government documents even are signed using an electronic signature. So that's an example of how those things go together, so that when you're thinking about your prototyping, and it might not be a simple concept like just a e-signature sounds so simple, but there's a bigger complexity that you're dealing with, and having all of these pieces around theory of change, the methodology and process helps make sure that you capture all of those things. In my book, The New School Rules, a concept called safe enough to try really caught on, and wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining that. So many times when we're trying to come up with a new solution to a problem, when we propose these ideas, we often get a lot of pushback as, what if this happens, and what if that happens, or we can't do it because of that, or we've tried it before, or someone else tried it. And so those are all like blockers to ideas. You could imagine that a lot of companies try to create new email optimizers or a new search engine, and you could see that there could be a lot of pushback for something as simple as that. But many organizations have, or many innovative companies have pushed through some of those things and provided a better solution. But I'm sure there were a lot of naysayers when they did enter the market. And Safe Enough to Try tries to address that in a way that helps you kind of push things forward. And kind of the main topic for under prototyping that we're going to talk about is the fact that it just doesn't need to be perfect, right? Like your idea doesn't need to be perfect at this stage. The thing that you're prototyping doesn't need to be perfect, but we also want to make sure that it doesn't harm you or others in trying to implement something. And by harm means, in the case of developing a product, it might be just not having to invest so much, right? Like, software or an app costs so much to develop. And so how can you test out your idea without going as far as developing an app? And there are plenty of tools these days that allow you to do that, just from creating really interactive mock-ups to now AI tools that will do a lot of coding for you. And so just don't invest too much money into the early prototypes, because I promise you, you'll go through a lot of these things. Like I mentioned, the Safe Enough to Try was designed to stifle people that are going to block you in your idea with the what ifs and this and that. And it might also make the problem you're trying to solve much bigger than what you had imagined if you try to incorporate all of that. And this is the Safe Enough to Try is the kind of the minimal viable product that we talked about. What do you need to invest in to get the feedback, to test your assumptions and make sure you're on the right track? And what are you going to learn to make it even better the next time around? Now, the hard part. It's time for you to share your prototype, the one that you've been working on. You could share it in the educator to entrepreneur community or put it on social media, but we want you to get it out there so that you could start experiencing the feedback that you need in order to take your product or solution to the next level. You don't want to wait for perfection, as we talked about, but you need to test your assumptions right away. And this is going to make your product even better. I know some of you are going to fear that someone might copy your idea, or that you're going to expose some particular IP around it. And quite frankly, like there's probably a lot of folks already working on problems like this in a bunch of different ways, and they mostly think that their approach to the solution is better. So let me just give you an example. So when we started getting well known at Education Elements for personalized learning, we published a lot of free resources, and you could see a lot of other companies. I use a product called HubSpot, and they publish a ton of digital resources on, how to compare CRMs, why their products are different, and how to use different products, some of the different integrations. All of that information is to educate the consumer. And we did the same with personalized learning. We provided a lot of different tools and resources, and still, companies didn't really copy them, and we got a lot of adoption, but schools weren't able to just adopt these things on their own. And so I'm sure you're familiar with these kinds of resources as well. And so if you really think about it, getting your prototype out there isn't going to be the end of your idea.